are in the midst of public input on the South Seas Island Resort MPD zoning application. We concluded with a speaker the last time we met, so we're starting with a fresh speaker today. Going by my list, Kelly Sloan is next. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat at that chair.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Speak up a little bit and
Okay.
see if you can get that microphone a little closer to you.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kelly Sloan, and I asked to be qualified as a sea turtle expert.
As a what expert?
I'm sorry, what kind of
Hang on a
expert?
second. I'm trying to figure out what she's saying.
Okay, thank you.
Sea turtle?
A sea turtle expert.
I am currently the director of the Coastal Wildlife Department and the Marine Turtle Permit holder at the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. I've worked with sea turtles for 18 years, and prior to moving to Florida, I was a biologist with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. In 2011, I completed a master's thesis on sea turtle conservation and health. I've been invited to present the results of my research at 11 international conferences focused on sea turtle conservation, and have over 20 publications in relevant topics. I've previously been qualified as an expert witness at the Eden Oak hearing.
At what?
Eden Oak. Would you like a copy of my resume?
I was the hearing examiner, yes. There's an echo. I might have you try to speak at the podium because we're having a hard time. Neil, I'm going to have her try to speak at the podium because the court reporter is having difficulty understanding her. We'll see if it improves, otherwise we'll have you go back.
Is there a microphone here? Or? It's right up there. Okay, so just speak loudly?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And you entered in your resume?
Yes.
Okay, this will be Sloan Exhibit 1. Do you have a copy for Ms. Montgomery?
I gave her one.
Oh, wonderful. Just give me a moment, Ms. Sloan. I'm ready.
Okay. The proposed rezoning will have a significant impact on sea turtles and other wildlife that is counter to the goals and objectives of the Lee Plan. 4 species of sea turtles are found swimming in the waters and nesting on the beaches immediately surrounding the land for which the rezoning is being sought, all of which are federally protected under the Endangered Species Act. The proposed rezoning will result in taller buildings and a significant increase in the intensity of use in the area. The proposal could increase the number of people utilizing the beaches and degrading the important beach and dune habitat necessary for shorebirds and sea turtles to successfully lay their eggs. The additional people using the resort will result in more flashlights on the beach at night. Even adhering to the window coverings and lighting standards required by the Lee Plan, the larger and taller buildings contained within the proposal will increase the amount of ambient light. Research demonstrates that even red light at high intensity can disorient hatchling sea turtles, and at very high intensities, the red light attracts hatchlings at the same rate as yellow and blue lights. The request to remove the vegetative buffer requirement would further expose lights such as headlights from cars and parking lots. The additional contribution to light pollution from all of these sources would be hugely detrimental to nesting and hatching turtles and can result in unsuccessful nesting attempts and elevated hatchling mortality due to disorientations. According to Lee County data, lighting violations occur annually in South Seas Resort, and SCCF has documented 13 hatchling disorientations in the last 5 years. Even without this clear pattern of violations on the property, there could still be impacts from perfect adherence to codes because there are lighting impacts due to the intensity associated with the larger and taller buildings. The relatively dark beaches on Sanibel and Captiva are so rare in Florida as our coastlines rapidly develop, making them an increasingly important haven for nesting and hatching sea turtles. with about 30 to 70 nests typically laid on South Seas beaches each year. There are potential impacts to thousands of hatchlings. Additionally, Policy 101.1.2 aims to protect and conserve environmentally sensitive coastal areas, such as beach and dune systems. And as previously stated, the increased density and associated intensity of use will degrade beach and dune systems in the area through increased foot traffic on sensitive beach habitat, additional litter and furniture left on the beach, and increased human interactions with nesting turtles. Similar issues arise under Goal 122, specifically Policy 122.1.2, that requires development affecting coastal and estuarine water resources to maintain or enhance the biological and economic productivity of the region. The added nutrient pollution will increase the likelihood and severity of a harmful algal bloom, which results in mortality and health impacts for sea turtles at all life stages. Our research provides clear evidence that even when red tides do not cause direct mortality of exposed wildlife, they can act as a physiological stressor with long-term impacts on sea turtle health. Toxins in nesting females are also transferred to their offspring, affecting hatching rates and possibly hatchling survival. The LEAD plan is very clear in its goals that action should be taken to protect and improve the water quality, wildlife biodiversity, and the critical habitats they rely on for their own sake and for the economic health of the county. Sea turtles are highly vulnerable species and need broad and intensive protection at all life stages to ensure their survival. This project jeopardizes the survival of sea turtles, and for this reason, the project is contrary to the relevant provisions of the Lee County Comprehensive Plan. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of sea turtles.
I have a couple of questions, if I might.
Just a minute, Neil. Kelly, I think that I saw you in the audience when we last met, but I'm not sure.
Yes.
So, and I know that you were sworn on that day, but just to be cautious, I'm going to swear everyone in again today.
Okay.
Because there may be some people that are going to speak that weren't here previously. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you will enter into the record today will be the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
I do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Kelly. You indicated that there have been violations at South Seas, but since you've been here for several days, you know that there are a multitude of owners within South Seas. And so we're aware that there are owners who violated those rules, but just because other people in South Seas violate the rules doesn't have anything to do with this application, does it?
I'm just here to speak on behalf of what I see on the beaches in the morning, which is disorientations in a South Seas resort. I'm not sure who the owners are of each property. Disorientations, yes.
Right, so we understand that you're not testifying as to whether this is on applicant's property or the remainder. It's just that it's occurred on the resort proper.
Correct.
Okay.
Are you aware of the fact that under the current regulatory scenario, there's no place within South Seas that has to meet the 50-foot water body setback?
I'm aware.
And are you aware that there will be areas now under the proposed application that will have to meet the 50-foot water body setback and provide plantings?
I'm not an expert on the codes. I'm a sea turtle biologist, and I'm here to talk about the behavior that I see based on my experience.
Okay, and are you aware of the fact that there's been a dune that's being constructed and planted to help by the applicant to help protect the sea turtles?
I think that dunes are always helpful. The argument that I'm making in terms of lighting, though, is that as the lights get more intense and higher, even if they're red lights, they can start to impact sea turtles regardless of dune height.
And I'm assuming you are aware of the fact that if this application is approved, the lighting conditions for the turtles will be better than it is now under the regulations proposed.
Right, so even if they're totally compliant with the code, I don't think that they're protective enough to satisfy the requirements of the Lee County plan.
Well, and the staff agrees with you because they required a higher standard than what.
There are some studies that I can point to if it would be helpful.
So,
I'm just wanted to tell the witness that if you have additional conditions you would like to recommend based on your background and observation, you can let us know when you're finished with the cross-examination.
Okay, thank you.
What is this? I don't know what- Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Sloan, are there any, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review the recommended conditions of approval that were prepared by staff and the applicant regarding the turtles, but is there specific measures that you could recommend that you think would be helpful?
So the intensity is my real concern, the light intensity, and unfortunately there aren't clear guidelines on what the intensity should be, but
So you're talking about like the wattage?
yeah,
Is that what you mean?
luminance and wattage is what they refer to it as. But what we know, there was an in-depth study in Pinellas County that compared residential areas to condos, and they found that the condo areas had a much higher rate. 62% of disorientations and 70% of hatchling mortality happened there versus only 30% near the single-family homes. So
Because the lights were more intense
Yeah.
associated with the condos?
Mhm.
Did it have any recommendation as to wattage in that study?
No, they didn't, and unfortunately, I think it's just to try to mimic the amount of light on a single-family home as closely as possible, because it's shown that that doesn't create disorientations like these big condos do. And another recommendation, I think, would be to make sure those vegetative buffers stay in place, because those do help shield a lot of the light from those bottom level parking
What
lots
do you
and
mean?
stuff.
Do you mean like more dunes or just like beachside vegetation? What do you mean?
The vegetation, yeah. The higher the vegetation can be and the thicker, the more lights it's going to block.
Can I ask Kelly a question? Kelly, are there other regulations that limit people's access to the sea turtles? I mean, I've been places where they have little flags or signs, and
There
they'll
are-
come after you if you violate those signs.
You're right, there are rules and regulations about it, but the problem is, you know, we're on the beaches every night on Sanibel, and unless there's enforcement every single night, people are still going to do it.
Well, I appreciate your insights regarding conditions I can share with the group, and it's probably no surprise to you that we have a number of sea turtle violations every year in the code enforcement realm, so it's a challenging thing to comply with for many beachside areas. Perhaps
is.
if we had more in the code regarding that, based on more recent studies, that we can do more.
I agree with you. I think it could be updated probably to reflect recent studies.
Okay. Ms. Montgomery, do you have any further questions?
I do not. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Madam
Thank you,
Hearing
Ms.
Examiner,
Sloan.
may I just ask one question, just as a point of clarification? Ms. Sloan, for the record, Adam Mendez, I think between the back and forth in the dialogue is that the request to remove, the request to impose a deviation on buffer requirements was part of your testimony, and that would be detrimental. Are you referring to the natural waterway buffer that's along the Gulf Coast, deviation 5E? That's the natural waterway deviation buffer?
I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are, but it was the vegetation buffer
Okay.
that was, you know, blocking sort of the bottom level of these resort condos.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sloan. Audrey Albright?
Good morning. May I be permitted to submit, my colleague on Wednesday left off, he was going to provide some conditions. So am I allowed to present those on behalf or?
Okay, so who was the witness?
Matt Paulus, our policy director. Who was it? Matt Paulus, our policy director.
He was,
able to be here today.
refresh my memory again, he was the policy director of,
SEC.
and I had asked him if he had any
Yes.
conditions to recommend, and he said they'd be forthcoming. Okay, so this is technically a DePaulis exhibit, right? Okay, sure, give that to me. Do you have copies for the county and the applicant? Thank you. If you could just give me a moment to mark the exhibit. must not have wrote them down. What was his other exhibit?
I thought he had a resume, but I may be wrong about that.
All right, well, Maria sorted out. For right now, I'm going to mark it as Exhibit 1. And if it has to be numbered to Exhibit 2 for him, then Neil will let you know.
Thank you.
And these are recommended conditions of approval.
Yes.
Matt can help. Okay. Audrey,
Yes. Can you hear me from here?
I can.
Okay. So good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak today. My name is Audrey Albrecht. I am a wildlife biologist. I have worked in the field of wildlife biology for 20 years. I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife... Yes, ma'am. I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife conservation biology from the University of Rhode Island. I've been a biologist with the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, SCCF, since 2016. Having worked in both the wildlife and habitat management and the coastal wildlife departments. I'm very familiar with Captiva Island and the South Seas Resort specifically, as I have been conducting year-round monthly shorebird surveys and monitoring nesting shorebirds and bald eagles on the island for the last 9 years. I was previously accepted as an expert witness at the Eden Oak hearing in 2019. So I hope to be considered an expert witness in wildlife biology today.
Please proceed.
As previously stated by my colleague Matt on Wednesday, there has been little discussion of the potential impacts the rezoning of South Seas and associated increased density would have on wildlife and the environment. The proposed rezoning could have a significant impact on wildlife that would be counter to multiple goals and objectives of the Lee Plan.
Hang on a second. Slow down when we read. We
Yeah,
speak fast,
sorry.
And the court reporter needs to take down everything you say.
Okay. This project is counter to policies within Goal 101. In the Lee Plan, Policy 101.1.1 requires that development within the coastal high hazard area be compatible with natural systems such as wildlife habitat. Policy 101.1.2 aims to protect and conserve environmentally sensitive coastal areas, including beach and dune systems and critical wildlife habitats. Increased density on the island and the associated intensity of use will degrade beach and dune systems in the area and cause further degradation of the surrounding estuaries through increased water pollution. Increased water pollution would have an impact on the foraging areas for piscivorous, fish-eating birds, including the state-designated threatened least terns and black skimmers, both of which nest in the area and forage in the waters surrounding Captiva Island and South Seas Resort. These species and many more like them require healthy fisheries for their survival and for that of their young. An increase in people also means an increase in the number of vehicles crossing the Sanibel Causeway and the roads of both Sanibel and Captiva. An increase in vehicular traffic increases the risk of road mortality for our wildlife, whose populations are already stressed. The Sanibel Causeway already sees many bird deaths due to vehicle collisions, which is among the top threats to birds in this country. Aside from the causeway, an area of particular concern is Sanibel Captiva Road, which must be traversed in order to access Captiva and the South Seas Island Resort. This road bisects two of the most extensive conservation lands on Sanibel, which include lands owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, the City of Sanibel, and the state of Florida. This area has some of the highest biodiversity found on our islands. Among the most sensitive species to be put in jeopardy by increased traffic is the endemic state-designated threatened Sanibel Island rice rat, found only on Sanibel Island.
Okay, what is this?
The Sanibel Island rice rat, it's endemic to Sanibel. It is only found on Sanibel, and it is threatened in the state of Florida.
Can you spell that?
Sanibel Island rice rat, R-I-C-E, rat, R-A-T.
You got it? Okay, thank you.
I can submit a copy of my...
Okay, that would be great for the court reporter.
Populations of this species occur on both the north and south sides of Sanibel Captiva Road. Mark recapture research by the University of Florida has shown that they do move across the roads to access other usable habitats. Roadkill surveys from the city of Sanibel from 2022 to 2024 indicate the most frequently injured or deceased species found on Sanibel Captiva Road is the eastern screech owl. These nocturnal birds often catch prey off the road and get struck by cars as they fly low and get dazed in the headlights. Increased travel to and from Captiva will put more pressure on this species. Data collected by SCCF's Wildlife and Habitat Management Department indicate that much of Sanibel's wildlife is under heavy pressure due to multiple storm surge events that have occurred since 2022, resulting in the loss of fresh water bodies. As a result, many taxonomic groups, such as turtles, considered to be the most at-risk for extinction vertebrate group, have taken heavy losses and have been using or crossing roads more often in search of fresh water or better habitats. 15 species from all 7 U.S. families of turtles inhabit or nest on Sanibel Island. 11 of these 15 species are subject to roadkill threats, as documented in the roadkill data from SCCF and the city of Sanibel. The federally designated threatened eastern indigo snake was last documented on Captiva in 1988 and on Sanibel in 1999. They are considered extirpated, meaning extinct in the area, on these 2 islands, although they still occur on neighboring islands such as Pine Island, North Captiva, and Cayo Costa. North Captiva and Cayo Costa.
North Captiva is like Upper Captiva.
Oh, yeah, I guess it depends who you ask. Apologies. Indigo snakes cross roads more frequently. The primary cause of this extirpation is road mortality. They cross roads more frequently in the winter while looking for mates, which coincide with our heaviest traffic period of the year. Indigo snakes are capable of moving between islands, as evidenced by an individual that was observed and photographed swimming in Redfish Pass towards and landing on the north end of Captiva in September 2012. This individual was tagged for tracking by SCCF at South Seas Resort and then killed by a worker at a condo in the resort 2 months later. Prior to Hurricane Ian, South Seas Island Resort had numerous wildlife crossing signs with bold lettering and featuring different species. They were very eye-catching, and I witnessed for myself many years as tourists noticed them and immediately reduced their speed. I hope that the resort will consider replacing these signs to encourage motorists to slow down and watch for wildlife. Likewise, I would encourage more signage on Sanibel and the Causeway as well. The proposed rezoning could result in more buildings that are taller than existing structures. Collisions with buildings are one of the top anthropogenic causes of avian mortality. There are 2 types of bird building collisions: daytime window strikes, resulting from the window effect, and nighttime collisions caused by disorientation from artificial light sources. The window effect occurs when birds are unable to see glass and perceive reflections as a continuation of the outdoor environment. The majority of these collisions occur at low-rise buildings versus high-rise. There are varying definitions of low-rise, but as seen in the presentation at this hearing on Friday, February 14th by MHK Architecture, the common definition of a low-rise building is 3 to 4 stories in height. In the applicant's 48-hour letter, section 5A, the applicant combines sea turtles, migratory birds, and wading birds into one group, and they strike out the section pertaining to reducing reflectivity to decrease potential bird strikes. By doing this, they are only addressing the lighting issue and disregarding a major source of loss. They state they will be in compliance with LDC section 1476. However, that section falls under Division 2, which is specific to sea turtles with no mention of birds. As described on South Sea's own website on a blog post dated October 3rd, 2024, quote, Captiva is a critical stopover for migratory birds traveling along the Atlantic Flyway. Knowing how important this location is for migratory birds, I would ask that staff keep those original conditions regarding reflectivity to prevent bird strikes. The beaches adjacent to the golf course are a nesting habitat for state-designated threatened least terns and killdeer. The beaches also support various migratory and resident seabirds and shorebirds, including federally threatened red knots and federally endangered piping plovers. All of these species are protected under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. In the Protected Species Survey conducted by Pannoni Environmental Consulting in September of 2022 and March of 2023, they state that because the project area does not include the beach or dunes and would not be within 300 feet of any recent breeding sites, that no impacts are anticipated. While the construction itself may not have an immediate impact on the beach or dunes, the presence of more people on the beach after completion would increase disturbance to nesting and migratory birds. Disturbance to nesting birds can lead to failure or abandonment of nests or colonies. Disturbance to resting migratory birds causes them to spend more time and energy flying rather than necessary behaviors such as resting or foraging. Their ability to rest and feed is essential to surviving their remaining migration. Just as we want to provide a safe and enjoyable experience for our human visitors, we should consider the same with our non-human visitors. More people also means more dogs. There is very little law enforcement presence on the beaches of Captiva in general, and there are a great number of people either unaware of or refusing to follow the county's ordinances in Section 4-31 prohibiting animals from running at large. I would encourage South Seas to work together with Lee County to ensure that more routine enforcement of these ordinances occurs, as off-leash dogs are not just threatening to wildlife, they are a public safety concern as well. Additionally, I would encourage South Seas to continue and increase their existing efforts to minimize disturbance through educational signage, such as those existing by the beach access south of the golf course. Goal 123 of the Lee Plan discusses managing coastal resources to maintain species diversity. Captiva Island hosts a great diversity of birds throughout the year. South Seas Island Resort specifically is a birding hotspot on eBird with 157 different species of birds observed. In the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission report on the economic benefits of wildlife viewing, they state that wildlife viewing contributes $5.8 billion to Florida's economy. At the time of that report, Florida was in the top in the country for wildlife viewing by out-of-state visitors. Birds are the most viewed wildlife, with shorebirds actually being the top category. Increased mortality of birds, whether it be from building or vehicle collisions, increased disturbance, degraded water quality, this has global implications. Migratory birds that rely on Captiva for nesting or as a migratory stopover come here from across the globe. Many shorebird species are long-distance migrants traveling from their Arctic nesting grounds to the southern tip of South America. Lastly, I just wanted to note that South Seas Island Resort identifies themselves as a 330-acre wildlife nature preserve, quote, on their social media accounts. And the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a nature preserve as an area where animals and plants are protected and that has very few buildings or homes. Thank you so much for your time today and allowing me to speak on behalf of our wildlife.
Thank you. Would you be willing to leave your statement
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
the court reporter? I'm not going to mark it as an exhibit unless you
Okay.
want to enter it into
No, I
as an
can.
exhibit.
Good morning. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
You mentioned that the indigo snake was killed by someone.
Yes.
It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it was killed by a non-South Seas employee, and it was reported to you folks that they had done it.
That's correct. It was reported to Fish and Wildlife Service.
And so you know it wasn't the applicant.
I think I just said it was killed on the property. I
Yeah,
misspoke.
you
I
left the
apologize.
impression that the applicant did. I just
Okay.
want to clarify that.
Correct, yes.
Aren't there other agencies, such as FWC and DEP, that have regulations and rules regarding the wildlife that you've outlined here today?
Yes.
And the applicant would be required to comply with all the FWC and FDEP rules.
Yes, correct.
And so there's an extensive protections that are already in place for the wildlife you're
Yes,
concerned
correct.
about. Let me ask you this. Are you aware of the fact that approximately 89 to 90 acres of the original 304 acres were conveyed to the Department of the Interior?
Yes.
And you're aware that those 89 to 90 acres are in conservation and available to wildlife?
Yes.
So approximately 1/3 of the original acreage is in conservation already,
Okay.
and that there is open space
Yes.
on the project now and will be in the future?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Did you have any recommended conditions other than, I noted that you recommended more signs alerting the public to wildlife crossings by various creatures?
Yes, I think probably the most important one would be to add, for the county, to add back in those remarks about reflectivity and not just considering the sea turtles and the lighting.
And then you also mentioned just
Which is important.
educational signs in general.
Yeah, the signs that they had prior to the storm were great. I really did see an effect where people would slow down immediately and look for wildlife.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to mark her statement as an exhibit. Did you hand it in yet?
Oh, I don't think I did, sorry.
Let me take it, I will mark it as your exhibit
Additional
one.
copies?
We can arrange for copies to be given to staff and the applicant. And I will make sure you get a copy of this.
Yeah, I have two more.
Oh, you do? Okay. When you get a chance, can you, and it doesn't have to be today, this Matt DePaulis, do you check to see if I marked, maybe it was his resume? Yeah, okay. James Evans, thank you. Mr. Evans?
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Can you hear me okay?
Yes?
Excellent. I have a few slides that I want to show during my presentation here.
You're here on behalf of the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation?
That is correct. I am James Evans, CEO of the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, for the record. SCCF is a science-based nonprofit organization based on Sanibel Island. Our mission is to protect and care for Southwest Florida's coastal ecosystems. We do this through our work on science, education, and advocacy, as well as conservation. We were founded in 1967 to protect the unique barrier island resources of Sanibel and Captiva Islands. We own and manage more than 2,100 acres of land in Southwest Florida, with over 1,800 acres on Sanibel Island. I've spent the last 25 years of my career working as a scientist and natural resources manager on Sanibel and Captiva Islands. During my career on the islands, I have developed water quality monitoring programs, establishing the City of Sanibel's first ambient water quality monitoring program in 2002, authoring several water quality monitoring reports, overseeing the city's water quality improvement projects, including the development of the City of Sanibel's Comprehensive Nutrient Management Plan, the Jordan Marsh Water Quality Improvement Project, and working closely with the city's Public Works Department to upgrade the city's Donex wastewater treatment plant to advanced wastewater treatment to improve water quality. I also have extensive water quality policy experience, working with the Florida League of Cities, traveling to Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. with mayors from Lee County and other mayors throughout the state as their water quality expert. I have testified at hearings about water quality and natural resource-related impacts, and testified before you at the Eden Oak hearing case. I thought that was in 2018, but I've heard 2018, 2019. But at that time, I was the Director of Natural Resources for the City of Sanibel.
I remember you.
Excellent, thank you. I also have extensive water quality experience. Let me move on here. I've served on numerous boards, including the South Florida Water Management District's Water Resources Accountability and Collaboration Committee, the South Florida Water Management District's C43 Reservoir Water Quality Treatment Component Feasibility Study Working Group, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual Project Delivery Team, the Lee County Coastal Advisory Council serving as chair, the Southwest Florida Watershed Council also serving as chair, and I was a member of the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program Technical Advisory Committee and co-chair of the CHNEP Management Committee. Prior to working for SCCF, I spent 21 years working for the City of Sanibel's Natural Resources Department in various positions, including conservation officer, environmental planner, environmental biologist, and I served as the director of natural resources for almost 8 years. While at the city, I was responsible for reviewing development permits for consistency with the city's land development code and the comprehensive land use plan, the Sanibel Plan, in regards to impacts to natural resources on Sanibel Island. During my time with SECF, I served as the environmental policy director prior to becoming CEO of the organization in 2022. I also have extensive experience in environmental land use planning and permitting, conservation land management and restoration, environmental education, and coastal resilience. I would like to, let me just finish and I'll provide you a copy of my CV, but I hold a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and a master's degree in environmental science from Florida Gulf Coast University. I'd like to provide you a copy of my CV and ask that you consider me as a subject matter expert pertaining to water quality, water policy, coastal resources management, specifically as it relates to wildlife and wildlife management, and other environmental issues impacting Sanibel and Captiva Islands.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I haven't had a chance to see the resume. He's clearly, has experience in environmental policy, and while he's been on boards and things, I was on the Water Resource Advisory Committee. That didn't necessarily make me an expert in water quality. He didn't say he's the hydrologist, and he didn't say he's the geologist, and he didn't say he's an engineer, and those are the people that are typically involved with water quality.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept your exhibit. This is Evans Exhibit 1, your CV.
Yes.
Were you able to get his introduction? Okay.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I would respectfully disagree with the applicant's counsel. I have developed and managed numerous water quality projects, including drafting water quality reports following the water quality standards of the state of Florida. And I would be happy to provide those to the record. I don't have those with me today, but clearly from my resume you can see that I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in environmental science, which covers all of the sciences that I've learned about throughout my education, and I have practiced water quality throughout my entire career. So I would respectfully disagree that I'm not an expert on water quality.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you. During the applicant's presentation, you have heard from them why they should be permitted to develop the South Seas Island Resort, and arguments why their zoning request is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the Lee Plan. Significantly increasing the number of hotel units at South Seas Island Resort is not in keeping with Goal 23 of the Lee Plan, known as the Captiva Plan. The goal of the Captiva Plan is to protect the coastal barrier island communities' natural resources such as beaches, waterways, wildlife, vegetation, water quality, dark skies, and history. The proposed zoning changes will greatly increase the number of hotel rooms on the northern tip of Captiva Island. These changes are not in keeping with the historical development pattern of 3 density units per acre on Captiva, and will have significant impacts on the natural resources of Captiva Island as well as Sanibel Island. So this is a graph showing the sea level the relative sea level trend at the Fort Myers monitoring station. This is data provided by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. These are data that are depended on by scientists and engineers and others working in the space of climate change, as well as just trying to figure out how sea level rise is changing. And you can see, if you look at the x-axis, you'll see the number of the years over time, and on the y-axis, you'll see meters on the left side as well as inches on the right-hand side. I added the inches on the right-hand side, and those are translated conversions from meters to inches so that you can see those changes. But what you'll note is that if you look at that trend line, which is based on a 95% confidence interval, based on 3.57 millimeters per year, plus or minus 0.42 millimeters per year, you can see that the trend shows approximately about a foot of sea level rise since 1960. And that doesn't take into account the noise in the data, the ups and downs within the data line. That's based on the trend line. So 12 inches of sea level rise roughly since 1960. This is also a graph from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. I'll just refer to it as NOAA. This is the projections from 1960 into the future. And you'll notice that if you look at where we are in 2025, that trend line is following the intermediate high projection line, and that is commonly used by agencies such as the Army Corps of Engineers as well as planners when looking at the impacts of sea level rise on our communities into the future. And you'll note that if you look at about 2050, we're going to experience almost a foot of sea level rise over the next 25 years. And if you'll notice also in that projection, it started to ramp up in the 1990s. And I think it's important to note that increasing density on a sensitive barrier island subject to sea level rise and stronger hurricanes associated with climate change is the antithesis of coastal resiliency. So you've already heard from a number of our scientists and experts from SCCF that have testified to some specific impacts to the county's water resources, beaches, and wildlife. I will not reiterate what they have already said, but I want to highlight a few areas of concern and add to the issues they raised in their testimony. I also want to start with some issues of water quality and concerns related to the wastewater demand of this project and the capacity issues at the FGUA wastewater treatment plant. And I'll just draw your attention, this is page 4 of the staff report, and you'll note in paragraph 2, the property is located within the Florida Governmental Utility Authority, FGUA, wastewater franchise area. Wastewater disposal service is available to the subject property with sufficient capacity to accommodate the request, also attached as attachment R. On this slide, you will see attachment R. That was included in the staff report. It's a letter from FGUA dated May 23rd, 2023. And note the highlighted box there. The application indicated that the proposed project consists of hotel buildings with 425 rooms in total, with an estimated potable wastewater demand of 85,000 gallons per day. Currently, FGUA facilities are able to accommodate these demands. During the design process, if existing conditions warrant, a hydraulic analysis may need to be performed by the project engineer to evaluate the impacts the proposed project may have on the existing water and wastewater systems. So this is a slide, this is slide 190 of the applicant's presentation, and I apologize for the quality. It was taken, I took a picture of it, and that's what I got. But this includes an updated availability letter from FGUA dated January 23rd, 2025. Sorry, that's FGUA letter dated January 23, 2025. This letter was not included in the staff report. And it's important to note that hotel rooms, 400 and I think it should say 435 hotel rooms at 200 gallons per day. It looks like on the screen it says 425, but it's actually, well, actually you can see the one on the right-hand side, 435 rooms. That's the updated numbers with the new availability letter. Note that 435 rooms at 200 gallons per day, updated flow of 87,000 gallons per day. For multifamily, you'll note that the previous letter indicated 200 gallons per day, but the updated LOA units, 193 units at 160 gallons per day at 30,880 gallons per day for a total of 117,880 gallons per day. And note that under the table on the left-hand side, the original LOA flow does not have the numbers calculated for multifamily. I'm not sure why that was excluded.
So the updated flow is 117,880.
Yes, ma'am. This map just shows a map of the South Seas property, and you'll notice, I'll use my pointer if it works here, there's a polygon up here showing the location of the FGUA plant, and this is the service area of the FGUA plant. So now I just want to talk a little bit about Florida Administrative Code Chapter 64E 6008, system size determinations that indicate the minimum design flows for systems serving any structure, building, or group of buildings shall be based on the estimated daily flow as determined from Table 1 or the following. They can also use an alternate way of calculating that using metered flow data, and that's highlighted in yellow there, you can see. But in this case, they didn't use the metered flow data. This is Florida Administrative Code 64E 6.008, System Size Determinations, Table 1. And I just want to point out, when you look at the first red arrow at the top there, you'll notice for hotels and motels, go to sub B, resorts, hotels, camps, cottages, and this is a per room calculation. And you'll note that under 64E 6.008, the recommendation is 200 gallons per day. And again, that's a per room calculation. I also want to bring you down to the next arrow, the red arrow there under residential. Note that for residences, single or multiple family per dwelling unit, again, per dwelling unit. And you'll notice that here, the way the DEP calculates this is a per bedroom basis, and you'll note that it is also based on a square footage calculation. So for a 1 bedroom, it would be 100 gallons per day. 2 bedroom would be 200 gallons per day. 3 bedroom would be 300 gallons per day, and a 4 bedroom would be 400 gallons per day. And there's also a note at the bottom about the square footage calculations. All right, so I want to walk you through some documents here. So the January 23rd, 2025 availability letter from FGUA shows a capacity for 435 hotel rooms at 200 gallons per day per room for a total of 87,000 gallons per day. The capacity for 193 multifamily room units at 160 gallons per day for a total of 30,880 gallons per day. I would assume that they used the numbers from the Lee County Utilities Design Manual, but that wasn't necessarily clear in the documents provided in the staff report. For a total capacity of 117,880 gallons per day for the South Seas Island Resort project. So again, under the minimum design flows under Florida Administrative Code 64E, 6.008 in Table 1, resorts, hotels, camps, cottages are a per room calculation, and that is 200 gallons per day. Some of our concerns. The 200 gallons per day for hotel rooms, there's uncertainty of how many units will have more than 1 bedroom because it is a per bedroom calculation. The 160 gallons per day estimated for 2 or 4 bedroom multifamily dwelling units, condos or timeshares that will be part of the rental pool. And this does not consider the peak flows, the calculations that are included in the Lee County Utilities Design Manual. The December 2015 FGUA capacity analysis report associated with the South Seas application to replace 140 employee housing units with 140 multifamily dwelling units, estimated 2 bedroom multifamily units to generate 240 gallons per day. So again, the capacity analysis provided by FGUA calculated 240 gallons per day. I have a copy of the capacity analysis if you'd like a copy of that. Would you?
You can submit it as an exhibit if you'd like.
Okay,
You're gonna
I would like to submit it as an exhibit. I have a few other exhibits as well.
And do you have a hard copy of your PowerPoint as an exhibit?
I do,
Okay,
yes.
thank
And I'll provide that at the end of
That'll
my...
be helpful to me and also to the court reporter.
I'd be happy to, and I have a copy of all of my comments that I can provide.
All right, I'm not trying to disrupt your flow. You continue.
No problem at all. Would you like me to provide the exhibits now or after?
No, you can do it at the end.
Very good, thank you. Because of the uncertainty with the number of rooms, flows for 2 to 4 bedroom units should use a conservative estimate average of 3 bedroom units. Because we're not accounting for 2 to 4 bedroom units, we're just saying units. A conservative estimate would be to use 3 bedroom units as the average between 2 and 4 bedroom units.
So you're saying it's not possible to accurately predict the demand unless knowing the character of the hotel units and the multifamily units that are proposed?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I'll go into that further in just a moment. So what I'm suggesting is that 3 bedroom units, or 2 to 4 bedroom units should use a conservative estimate of 300 gallons per day, resulting in a flow of 57,900 gallons per day for multifamily units. Total flow for 435 hotel rooms at 200 gallons per day is 87,000 gallons per day, plus the 193 multifamily at 300 gallons per day, again, using a conservative estimate, would be 57,900 gallons per day for a total of 144,900 gallons per day. The design capacity at the plant is between 180,000 and 264,000 gallons per day, and that really depends on the treatment method that they're using, and that is outlined in the permit that was issued by the Department of Environmental Protection for the FGUA plant. I also have a copy of that I can provide you.
Does this plant serve only the resort, or does it serve all of Captiva?
It serves all of South Seas, the entire property of South Seas.
Thank you.
In the December 2015 capacity analysis report, FGUA stated they have between 41,000 and 82,000 gallons per day of additional capacity, again, depending on the treatment method and pending construction of an injection well. And this was a 2015 report, so I'll get to that in just a minute. So if you do the calculations, at 82,000 gallons per day, which is the maximum amount of additional capacity calculated at the time, and recognizing the removal of 140 employee housing units, that this capacity analysis was used to determine the additional capacity needed to support the removal of those 140 employee housing units and convert them to other uses. That was calculated at 120 gallons per day, and that was set by FGUA in that capacity analysis. That provides 16,800 gallons per day. So when you add up the total available capacity or additional capacity, you have not total capacity over the entire plant. That's 264,000 gallons per day. But when you look at the 82,000 gallons per day of additional capacity, and you add that to the 16,800 gallons per day that was estimated by FGUA, you get 98,800 gallons per day. Adding in the capacity recognized by the removal of the 107 hotel units, which were 1-bedroom units, at 100 gallons per day. Again, this number was set by the FGUA. That totals 10,700 gallons per day. So 98,800 gallons per day plus the 10,700 gallons per day gives you 109,500 gallons per day total capacity, total available capacity. Total estimated flow for the project would be 144,900 gallons per day, again, based on averaging the 2 to 4 bedroom units. That gives you, a much truer estimate, and I would argue a conservative estimate, which exceeds the capacity of the FGUA plant by 35,400 gallons per day. So now I want to bring your attention to A document that was included on page 524 of the staff report.
I have a question of you.
Yes.
Since wastewater is a concurrency item, if at the time of development order, they were not able to demonstrate that there was adequate capacity available at the plant to accommodate the flows predicted, whether it's hotel, multifamily, that would be a bar to obtaining a building permit. Would you agree with that?
I would agree to that, and I would argue that moving forward with this project without having capacity means that this zoning shouldn't be approved.
Okay, and so there, can we go to the previous slide? I just want to make sure I understand. Based on your calculations and your testimony, you're estimating 109,500 capacity available. And what did they represent they were going to generate by virtue of this request?
They argued that they only needed a total capacity of 117,800 gallons per day. 117,880 gallons per day is what was included in the availability letter provided by FGUA to the applicant.
So assuming your numbers are correct and their numbers are correct, there would need to be system enhancements to accommodate their proposal.
That is correct.
Okay. And absent available capacity, then that would be a bar to permitting.
Yes.
Okay.
So now I want to bring your attention to page 524 of the staff report. And you'll notice the title of this document is South Seas Water and Sewer Demand Analysis. The highlighted area at the bottom under B, sanitary sewer. Just note that this is for the existing resort per ADD 2022-00098. And if you look at the existing resort, you'll note that they have an existing demand of 104,692 gallons per day. And when you look at the proposed mixed-use development per DCI 2023-00052, note that 196 multifamily units at 200 gallons per day, and I think it's important to point out that they used the 200 gallons per day number, not the 160 gallons per day number, for a total of 39,200 gallons per day.
Where am I looking?
At the bottom, you see the red box at the bottom, ma'am?
Proceed.
Okay. So 435 hotel rooms at 200 gallons per day, equal to the 87,000 gallons per day, which was also in the availability letter that they provided. 6 restaurants at 49,980 gallons per day is equal to 49,980 gallons per day, obviously. 78 boat dock slips at 4 gallons per day, 312 gallons per day. A water park at 10,965 gallons per day, for a total proposed demand of 187,457 gallons per day. And you'll note the footnote at the bottom. The proposed South Seas Island Resort, MPD, results in an estimated increase in sanitary sewer demand of 82,765 gallons per day. The subject property is located in the sanitary sewer service area, and it says here Florida Gulf Utilities Authority, but we know that's Florida Governmental Utilities Authority. So here is the availability letter that was provided by the applicant on slide 190 of their presentation. The letter of availability from FGUA states they have capacity for 117,880 gallons per day, not 187,457 gallons per day, which is a document included in the staff report. This would leave 76,543 gallons per day for 640 units outside of the MPD. I believe that calculation is just shy of 120 gallons per day. And again, I don't know how many rooms are in each of these units that are in the 640 units outside of the MPD, but I can't imagine that there would be enough sewer capacity to be able to support that after this project is approved. So now I just want to take a few moments to walk you through the sensitivity of the area where the FGUA plant is located. Note that it's surrounded by mangroves. It's between Chadwick Bayou on the left-hand side there. Chadwick Bayou extends up to the north along Pine Island Sound. That map is from LIPA. Note here that the property to the north is owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or Department of Interior. It's tidal mangrove wetlands. The land to the south of the plant and around the plant is owned by FGUA. It is also tidal mangrove wetlands. I gave some dimensions just to give you a perspective of the size of the plant. It's roughly 350 feet to the water, probably about 370 feet to the waterward-most mangrove on the east side of the property. Here are some images from February 21st, 2025. Obviously, you can see the impacts on the mangroves from the recent storm events. And you can see the plant much clearer here, I think.
So
There's another image.
the storm surge of the salt water caused this brown?
Yes, that is correct. So between the wind and the storm surge, it had a direct impact on the mangroves.
Between the
Wind
what
is,
and-
I'm sorry?
Between the what and the storm surge?
Between the wind
Oh.
and the storm surge. Wind is detrimental to red mangroves in particular. Black mangroves are also susceptible to wind damage. They can handle saltwater flooding, but it probably had more to do with the wind damage in addition to the inundation of the saltwater for extended periods of time.
Will this regenerate?
It will regenerate, that is correct. And we have experience restoring mangrove areas. They'll come back on their own if given enough time. In fact, a study that we did following Hurricane Charlie in 2004 suggested about 10 years for a mangrove system that was impacted to recover almost fully.
So will they still perform like a filtration function and as habitat for fish when it's in this condition?
No, this condition has limited capacity to uptake nutrients and be able to perform a water quality function. As far as habitat, we do have species that still use these mangrove areas, but not to the extent they do in their pristine condition. But that doesn't justify the site being less important for wildlife or water quality. This area will recover, and it is protected tidal wetlands. So I want to show you a table here, the City of Sanibel's Utilities Assistance to South Seas Wastewater Treatment Plant from 2010 to 2015. And what this shows is a number of occasions where South Seas Island Resort required the assistance of the City of Sanibel because their plant did not have the capacity or needed assistance to take on the effluent water from the plant and process that at the Donex wastewater treatment plant on Sanibel Island. And I just want to draw your attention to the red arrow, which points to the date of April 8th, 2015, and you'll notice the gallons hauled is 117,000 gallons. And note that it was accepted raw wastewater. That's the description of the assistance, and under the cause, you'll note that it's flow in excess of plant capacity. This is a wastewater treatment malfunction and abnormal event report from that April 8th, 2015 date. As you look at the report, you'll note that the source of the spill was in with the clarifier. Note that under the date, discharge is ongoing, and you'll note in the table prior that there were a number of other capacity issues and power outages after that date. And if you look at the malfunction or cause, you'll note that it's elevated turbidity levels. The turbidity is the the stuff in the water that creates that creates turbidity in the water can shade out seagrasses and things like that, but in this case, turbidity is the suspended things in the water. And I'll just note that under the corrective remedial action being taken, a vac truck was used and the destination was the city of Sanibel. And the remedial action being taken, you'll note on the upper right-hand corner of the slide, I did a call out here so that you can see it easier. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but note that at this time there have been a total of 14 loads of raw reject effluent hauled to the city of Sanibel Island Treatment Plant for additional treatment.
This was in 2015?
That was in 2015, correct. And I just want to note the pattern of exceedances to the wastewater treatment plant, and that's not with all of the increased density, intensity of use, specifically the amount of wastewater that will be coming to the plant if this project is approved.
Has the plant been upgraded since that time? If you know, answer. If you don't.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
And so I also want to draw your attention to this letter dated February 5th, 2025, which wasn't long ago. This is a warning letter from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And as you can see, it is addressed to the FGUA plant, Mr. Sam Kane. And I just want to note that I'll read the first paragraph there. In September 2024, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection was notified by the State Watch Office that your facility referenced above had unauthorized discharges or unpermitted sanitary sewer overflows of approximately 60,100 gallons in potential violation of Chapter 403, Florida statutes, and Rules 62-620 and 62-6004, Florida Administrative Code, which prohibits unauthorized discharges. And I'll just note at the bottom, violations of Florida statutes or administrative rules may result in liability for damage and restoration and the judicial imposition of civil penalties pursuant to sections 403.121 and 403.161 Florida statutes. And I just, want to take a minute to talk about the plant and the capacity issues here. So the record demonstrates that the FGUA plant struggles to handle the current volume of wastewater, let alone a significant increase in the volume by adding significantly more guests to the resort. An independent evaluation of the wastewater capacity should be performed to determine the actual wastewater demand and whether or not the FGUA plant actually has the capacity to support the MPD. Without capacity and the ability to protect the coastal waters and mangrove wetlands where the plant is located, the zoning application should be denied. The wastewater treatment plant currently does not treat to advanced wastewater treatment standards. The reuse water that is distributed as irrigation to the golf courses and landscape to support the resort is likely to contribute to additional cumulative impacts to our coastal water quality, water bodies that are already listed as impaired by the state of Florida and are on the state 303D list of impaired water bodies, which several of our staff at SCCF have already testified to. In 2013 and 2014, SCCF scientists conducted a series of studies for the city of Sanibel to support the development of a comprehensive nutrient management plan for Sanibel. These studies evaluated the sources of nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus impacting water quality on Sanibel and the surrounding coastal waters. The study included water quality monitoring for both surface and groundwater, development of site-specific runoff coefficients, and an analysis of the various land uses and nutrient-loading hotspots impacting water quality. As part of that work, reuse water from the city's Donex wastewater treatment plant was identified as a major source of nutrient loading to Sanibel's groundwater, surface water, and surrounding coastal waters. At that time, the Donex wastewater treatment plant was not treating its wastewater to advanced wastewater treatment standards. The city of Sanibel has since invested more than $20 million in upgrades to the plant to bring it up to AWT standards. And that ended up in reducing the nitrogen and phosphorus effluent from the plant by approximately 50 to 70%. The FGUA plant, which does not treat to AWT standards, is not currently capable of treating the water to a level that will be protective of our coastal waters and may further impair the coastal and estuarine waters and resources of Lee County, likely contributing to the decline of Lee County's coastal ecosystems, such as seagrass beds and the organisms that depend on these important ecosystems. Again, Dr. Eric Milbrandt from our Marine Lab testified to this issue as well. And I'll note that in the documents provided by the DEP, you can go to their website and you can look at the effluent from the plant. It ranges anywhere from 10 to 20 milligrams per liter for total nitrogen, well above the AWT standards. When you look at the AWT standards, it's broken down by a number of different constituents and limits. The chemical biological oxygen demand is set at 5 milligrams per liter or less. The total suspended solids is set at 5 milligrams per liter or less. Total nitrogen is set at 3 milligrams per liter or less. And total phosphorus is set at 1 milligram per liter or less. Again, those are the AWT treatment standards. So I want to move on to some other issues here. In the letter dated February 19, 2015, from staff, Lee County's, you'll note that it's on the screen here. Lee County staff are, sorry, one moment here. I just want to draw your attention to some language at the bottom. This is related to the conditions requiring a surface water quality monitoring plan. And note that at the bottom here, application number 24-0723-44841 authorized the construction and operation of a stormwater management system serving the South Seas Island Resort golf course renovation and other resort facilities, and provides for total on-site retention with no positive outfall. Based on this new information provided by the applicant, staff is amenable to eliminating the recommended surface water quality monitoring plan condition. Based on the level of treatment at the FGUA plant and combined with the underlying geology, sandy soils, and relatively low elevation on a barrier island subject to tidal pumping. And I'll just note that tidal pumping, it occurs when the tides rise and fall. What happens is the groundwater gets saturated and it creates a pumping effect which pulls water that is sitting in a stormwater retention area into the groundwater, and it can transmit that through our permeable sandy soils laterally into the coastal waters. And so because of that tidal pumping that occurs, it will transmit that into the groundwater and adjacent coastal waters, and the applicant has not demonstrated that they will meet the surrounding water quality standards. Therefore, they should provide a complete analysis of the impacts of reuse water on the surrounding waters and be required to implement a surface water quality monitoring plan. And I'll also note that in the beginning of my presentation, I showed you several slides that showed the sea level rise trends provided by NOAA, as well as the projections. When you look at that, we've had a foot of sea level rise approximately a foot of sea level rise since 1960. And for the next 25 years, we're projected to get another foot of sea level rise. Because of the low elevations, I would argue that groundwater is going to continue to rise and interact with the stormwater features on the golf course and other areas of South Seas, further pulling that water through tidal pumping into the coastal waters. So, based on my testimony so far, the project is inconsistent with the following goals, objectives, and policies of the Lee Plan. Policy 60.1.1 required design of surface water management systems to protect or enhance the groundwater. Goal 69, environmental health, protect public health through the expansion and improvement of clean air and water requirements. The project will directly impede the county's goal to strengthen and expand clean water requirements by allowing more pollution to enter water bodies that currently do not meet state water quality standards. Goal 122, estuarine water quality. The project fails to manage estuarine ecosystems in order to conserve productivity through maintaining or improving water quality, protecting wildlife diversity, and reducing or maintaining current pollution loading and system imbalances. Goal 123, resource protection. Natural resources should be managed in order to maintain and enhance native habitats, floral and faunal species diversity, water quality, and natural surface water characteristics. Goal 125, water quality. This project will not ensure that water quality is maintained or improved for the protection of the environment and people of Lee County. Objective 125.1, this project fails to maintain high water quality, meeting or exceeding state and federal water quality standards. Pine Island Sound is impaired for nutrients on the FDEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's 303D list. Adding further nutrient pollution to the adjacent water bodies will neither maintain high water quality nor meet state and federal water quality standards that are required to improve federally listed 303D water bodies. Objective 125.1.2, new development and additions to existing development must not degrade surface and groundwater quality. Policy 125.1.4, developments which have the potential of lowering existing water quality below state and federal water quality standards will provide standardized, appropriate monitoring. So now I want to move on to a discussion about coastal wildlife and Deviation 5 natural waterway buffer. And there was a discussion with Ms. Kelly Sloan earlier on, and I want to add some clarity there. The applicant is seeking a deviation for compliance with the Land Development Code for vegetative buffers along the Gulf Beach. Tract H is the one I'll be referring to. And note here, this is the beachfront villas, a beautiful rendering of the buildings that will be located along the Gulf of Mexico. And I would argue that a deviation for the vegetation buffers along the Gulf front buildings is one that will have a direct impact on wildlife that utilize the beaches at South Seas, such as sea turtles and shorebirds that depend on our beaches for survival. The applicant, I believe it was Christian Andrea, the landscape architect, suggested that sea oats and railroad vine will satisfy the intent of the buffers. However, the low-growing nature of the vegetation proposed will not buffer the mass of the buildings along the beach, resulting in potential lighting impacts to sea turtles. For example, with the underbuilding parking, lights from vehicles such as automobiles and golf carts could directly impact sea turtle nesting behavior and hatchling success. We heard extensive testimony from Mr. Patterson regarding what a buffer is. He read the definition and their intent. Vegetation buffers along the Gulf beaches must be enforced, and a deviation from the LDC should not be granted for areas between the Gulf front buildings and beaches to protect coastal wildlife that depend on our beaches for survival. The project is inconsistent, let me just say, granting the waiver would be inconsistent with the following goals, objectives, and policies of the Lee Plan. The project is inconsistent with the following goals, objectives, and policies. Goal 123, resource protection, manage coastal, wetland, and upland ecosystems and natural resources in order to maintain and enhance native habitats, floral and faunal species diversity, water quality, and natural surface water characteristics. Objective 123.3, wildlife, maintain and enhance the fish and wildlife diversity and distribution within Lee County for the benefit of a balanced ecological system. Objective 123.4, endangered and threatened species in general, protects habitats of endangered and threatened species and species of special concern in order to maintain or enhance existing populations numbers and distributions of listed species. You heard from two of our expert witnesses at SECF regarding sea turtles and shorebirds. Objective 123.5, loggerhead sea turtles. Continue the sea turtle protection program to minimize the disorientation of sea turtles along the Gulf beaches. I would argue if this deviation is approved for this development, that it will have direct impacts on sea turtles and be contrary to this objective. That's all I have, Madam Hearing Examiner.
Okay, can we enter your documents in as exhibits? PowerPoint, and if you are reading from a statement and you don't mind submitting that as an exhibit, that will be helpful to me and also to the court reporter.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, actually I have one more statement, if you wouldn't mind me
Sure.
finishing. Sorry. I just have one note that wasn't included in my slides here. I wanted to correct the record in a statement that was made during the first day of the hearing. I believe it was during Mr. Farrell's testimony related to traffic and hurricane evacuation. The applicant's counsel, Ms. Montgomery, asked Mr. Farrell about the roadway restrictions on the islands, and Ms. Montgomery made an offhand comment that the roadway on Sanibel is restricted due to aesthetic reasons, and Mr. Farrell agreed. The same question was posed to City Manager Dana Souza, but he was not allowed to answer the question. I'd like to add some clarity. I spent 21
Sorry,
years...
this is outside the scope of what you've identified your testimony was.
All right, but he can speak about whatever he wants.
Okay.
He may not be an expert in this area, but it doesn't preclude him from speaking to it.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner. So I'd like to add some clarity here. I spent 21 years with the City of Sanibel working on environmental and planning issues, including managing native vegetation plantings within the right-of-way along Periwinkle Way. While our single-lane roadways on Sanibel may serve an aesthetic value, the restrictions are not due to aesthetic reasons. They are due to limited right-of-way along Periwinkle Way that will require the City of Sanibel to take privately owned property along Periwinkle to widen the roadway. I'm not sure the city would get a lot of support from the community for taking of private property to increase road capacity to support the applicant's project.
And this is specific to Sandcap Road, right?
No, this is specific to Periwinkle Way.
Periwinkle Way.
Yes, ma'am, it's on Sanibel Island. The reality is that this zoning will put a lot more vehicles on the road to support the increased number of hotel rooms, visitors, and staff, resort staff to support the increased number of guests, with no way to mitigate the increased traffic pressure on the roadways of Sanibel and Captiva that impact wildlife, the quality of life of residents and existing businesses and their staff. We firmly believe that if this property is rezoned to allow this increase in density and intensity of use, it will have significant impacts on our natural resources, including water quality, wildlife, and coastal resources of Lee County. SECF stands in opposition to this zoning application. We want the South Seas Island Resort to be successful. It just can't be at the expense of our natural resources, our residents, and existing businesses. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today.
Thank you. Let's talk about your exhibits now. First and foremost, the PowerPoint.
Yes.
This will be Evans Exhibit 2. Do you have a copy for staff and applicant
Yes, I do.
and the court reporter? The PowerPoint is Evans Exhibit 2. And did you want to provide your statement?
Yes.
That'll be Evans Exhibit 3. Debbie, that'd be helpful, right? Yeah. We'll take a break now. After, well. Thank you.
Just note that there are the comments about the first two slides that I showed related to sea level rise are not included in this statement.
Okay, Neil, I know you're probably going to want to cross-examine this witness. I'd like to give the...
I know, but I looked at my
reporter-
watch and I know it's
A court
Court
reporter
reporter
arrest
break
at
times,
10:30?
yeah.
Madam Hearing Examiner, I do have a few other things for
Yes.
your records that I can provide. I have copies of 64E6008 system size determinations from the Department of Environmental Protection.
I'm sorry, the mic
Code sections?
didn't pick that up. I didn't hear what you're submitting.
I'll explain the exhibits that I'm going to be providing you. I have Florida Administrative Code 64E6.008 system size determinations, which was in my presentation. I'd be happy to provide you a copy of those. I also have the capacity analysis report dated December 2015 for the FGUA plant, South Seas Plantation Wastewater Treatment Plant, which I can provide you a copy of. I also have a copy of the first 4 pages of the permit, which shows the 264,000 gallons per day permitted capacity of the FGUA plant. And then finally, I have the warning letter dated February 5th, addressed to Mr. Sam Kane, and this was in relation in regards to the violation for the 60,100 gallons of discharge that was in violation.
Okay, the code section is going to be Evans Exhibit 4.
Is that the Florida Administrative Code?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is the capacity analysis report is Evans Exhibit 5. Evans Exhibit 6 is a letter from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Is that the first 4 pages of the permit? Or I'm sorry.
This is notice of permit issuance.
Okay.
The title of the
Okay.
letter.
Thank you.
And then there is a second letter from the Florida Department of Protection, and this is going to be Evans Exhibit 7.
Okay, and that's the 2015.
That's 2025. It's a warning
Okay.
letter.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Neil, if you don't mind, we're going to take a break for the
No.
court reporter. We will resume Mr. Evans. I recommend you return to the hot seat following the break.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We just concluded with the testimony of James Evans, and we are ready for cross-examination by Ms. Montgomery.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, I believe you indicated that your organization owns 1,800 acres on Sanibel. Have you acquired any acres on Captiva to protect the environment?
No, we don't own any land on Captiva. However, we do own Patterson Island, Albright Island, adjacent to Captiva, as well as part of Buck Key Island, which is just across Roosevelt Channel from Captiva. We also own land on North Captiva.
You provided a lot of testimony regarding the wastewater treatment plant. Go back to your resume. You're not an engineer, is that correct?
That is correct.
So you haven't designed, managed, or anything in regards to a wastewater treatment plant?
No, my work has been specific to the water quality issues associated with the Donex wastewater treatment plant, and as I testified, I oversaw the development of the city's comprehensive nutrient management plan.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Did you or anyone working for you take any water quality samples from the lakes on the golf course?
Not that I'm aware of. However, Mark Thompson, one of our biologists that works for our marine lab, has done extensive water quality work on.
I'm not asking what somebody else has done. I'm just asking if you have any sampling of the water quality in the lakes on the golf course.
I'm not aware of any as I sit here today.
Okay, thank you. Have you done any water quality sampling in the coastal areas around South Seas?
Yes, the SCCF Marine Lab has conducted sampling in the areas adjacent to Captive Island.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Anything specifically on the beach, on the shore surrounding South Seas?
There's data that was provided by the Marine Lab, which was referenced in Dr. Eric Milbrandt's testimony yesterday, where they did a transect off the coast of, several transects off the coast of Captiva, which included looking at the area of the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, so that's the only data that you know of?
That's the only data that I am aware of.
Okay. You spent a lot of time testifying about the 2015 capacity analysis of the plant. That plant, well, that study is 10 years old, correct?
That's correct.
And there have been improvements since that date to the plant.
There have been improvements.
And one of those improvements, as I understand it, is a deep well injection.
That is correct. The capacity still sits at 264,000 gallons per day.
And there is a grant that was obtained to do another deep well injection. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And are you aware of the fact, you alluded to the fact that FGUA might rely on LCU's flow?
I don't believe I testified to that.
Okay, I thought you did. Well, then let me ask it this way. You went through...
I'm sorry, if you're referring to the Lee County, so maybe your question wasn't clear.
Okay, that's...
I referenced the Lee County Utilities Design Manual.
Yes. And Lee County Utilities has a chart that identifies the gallons per day flow for different uses.
It uses a value of 160 gallons per day for single-family, multifamily, but does not account for the number of rooms associated with those units.
I understand your point, but the point is, FGUA, are you aware of the fact that FGUA relies on Lee County Utilities?
Yes, but I'm also aware of, in the capacity analysis, they estimated significantly higher flows for the units that were going to be replaced.
That wasn't my question. You're disputing the numbers that were used. And so my question is, are you aware of the fact that FGUA relies on Lee County Utilities flow data per the various uses?
I am aware of that, but on page 524 of the staff report, the value used for calculating those was 200 gallons per day. So that was changed to use the 160 value later on, but the availability letter provides for 117,000 gallons, not the 187,457 gallons per day in the staff report.
Well, let me ask you another question, because in the staff report, as attachment R, is an FGUA letter. Do you recall that?
I do. I believe that was my 5th slide.
And in that letter, and typically all letters from utilities, what they say is that this is just a letter of availability. It's not a commitment to serve. And when you go essentially to get a development order, the capacity has to be reanalyzed. Do you agree that that's what FGUA is saying, where this is not a commitment to serve?
I don't know. That's your interpretation, but that's not how... I don't understand what you're asking me.
Well, okay, in the last paragraph it said, this letter should not be construed as a commitment to serve, but only as a statement of the availability of service, and is effective for, in this case, 12 months, and the one that's in the staff report. So is it your understanding that at the development order stage, another analysis has to be done in order to obtain a development order?
Yes, I understand that, but my question would be, why why are we asking for capacity that would, woefully underestimate what's needed for the entire project, based on page 524 of the staff report?
Okay, that's your opinion. I just want to see if you understand the final determination.
I understand, yes.
Okay. And I don't know that you'd be surprised that I disagree with your opinion. Well, let me ask you a question, since you have significant experience in water quality and are very concerned about water quality. On Captiva Island, outside of South Seas, isn't everybody else on a package plant or a septic tank?
Yes.
And as a general rule, septic tanks on a barrier island are not conducive to good water quality.
That's correct.
Since you've been involved in the Sanibel plant, why don't, if you know, because I think you've been involved from a policy standpoint, why don't the septic tanks on Captiva connect to the Sanibel plant?
Well, because that's part of unincorporated Lee County.
But there's been discussions, correct?
There have been discussions, and I believe Holly Smith testified to the fact that based on the density and intensity of use on the South Seas Island Resort, that would exceed the capacity that's available on Sanibel at the Donex wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah, but we're not asking to connect South Seas because they have their own plant. I mean, it's an existing...
I believe she testified to the fact that there were discussions of all of Captiva being connected. I may be wrong on that issue, but I thought that's what I heard during Holly's testimony.
Okay, so your testimony was that reuse is, quote, likely to contribute to water quality issues. That's an assumption, but you don't have any data to support that, do you?
I did present during my testimony that the total nitrogen in the effluent is between 10 and 20 milligrams per liter, and that is significantly higher than AWT standards. And so if that reuse water is being used on the golf course in sandy soils, then it has the potential to go into the groundwater and be transmitted through tidal pumping into the coastal waters.
Let me ask you a question. You're familiar, I believe you said, with the Sanibel Comprehensive Plan.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Is Periwinkle designated as a constrained road?
It is a constrained road, yes.
Is it designated that way in the comprehensive plan?
It may be.
So you don't know?
I don't know.
Okay. You provided a letter, I think it's number 7, your exhibit. Where did it go? Ah, I got it. Do you have any knowledge as to why it took 6 months for Ms. Swigert to send a letter to the FGA manager?
I do not.
Do you know, because I don't, I feel dumb, what is the State Watch Office?
That's a good question. I don't know what the State Watch, I imagine it's an independent group that oversees these violations.
Yeah, see, what I don't know is this a government agency? Is this volunteers?
I don't know, but the
Lawyers?
letter is from the DEP to FGUA.
So since I don't know what that group is and I don't know what qualifications they have, what happens next? I mean, is there some analysis to verify this?
That's a great question. I can't answer it.
Okay, so we have to look further.
Yes, ma'am.
I have heard, and I may have heard wrong, that the 2015 incident that you pointed out happened because an employee was on vacation and nobody was managing the plant while he was gone. Do you know if that's true?
I don't know if that's true.
And I noticed you identified that event in 2015, and you haven't identified one in the next 10 years. So I'm assuming if there were another problem, you would have told us.
No, that was the data that I had, and that was the data I used. I don't know if there were previous violations or additional pumping that had to go to the city of Sanibel. Others may be able to testify to that.
Okay, do you know whether or not a public or private capacity analysis has been done at the FGOA plant since 2015?
I'm not aware of one, and if there has been an analysis, I would love to see it.
Okay.
But the current permit is for 264,000 gallons per day.
Permits can be amended and updated, correct?
I understand that, yes.
And I'm assuming during your time working for Sanibel that they periodically update their consumptive use permits and they update their wastewater treatment plant permits?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And a lot of those permits are only good for a certain period of time, so you have to update them.
Yes.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
Jeff Alexander?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Down here, you don't-
Yes. Do you want to enter exhibits? What am I accepting here?
This is my resume, a letter to the judge report, and PowerPoint, and a copy of my guidance. We get stuff.
2 copies, okay. Did you give one to staff? Do you have one to give to staff? All right, I'm going to name this J. Alexander Composite Exhibit 1. You say it's a resume and then a letter to me, and then your PowerPoint.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, and I marked that as Composite 1. You may begin.
Sorry. Let me begin with a quick, I have to beg your indulgence. I recently lost all of the hearing in my left ear, and it's kind of unsettled me a little bit, so I'm a little disoriented at times, and I don't hear things, so I may ask you to repeat things if I have to. I apologize for the inconvenience on that, but we're not sure we can get that fixed. Hi, my name is Jeff Alexander. I have a master's degree in public administration. I'm a certified professional emergency manager. For 27 years, I served as a staff member to the Northeast Florida Regional Council. In that capacity, I served as the senior managing director. While I was there, I created statewide emergency management programs by coordinating all of the regional councils in the state. And then after leaving the council for 9 years, I was the County Deputy Director of Emergency Management, with my primary responsibilities including evacuation recommendations and management, EOC Operations Officer, Logistics Officer, disaster response planning. In 1988, I worked on the regional evacuation study for Northeast Florida. During that study, I modernized the computer programming for doing demographic analysis and vulnerability analysis for the population. In 98, I managed the 1998 evacuation study update. During that, I updated some of the methodologies, and I created the first full-color atlas for storm surge and a methodology for displaying it. In 2005, I managed the update to the Northeast Florida Regional Evacuation Study. During that time, I updated methodologies, and the state expressed a desire in a working group to update all of the evacuation studies in the state. I submitted a grant application or suggested funding of a statewide program to update the hurricane evacuation studies in the state simultaneously. The legislature had allocated money for that project, and the State Division of Emergency Management granted me a contract to do that under the guise of the Northeast Florida Regional Planning Council and the statewide system of coordinating with the other regions. During the statewide regional evacuation study creation, we changed the way studies were done. We created new methodologies, and we changed the way the National Hurricane Center reports out storm surge so that it was more usable to the local emergency management agency. In addition to creating the statewide regional evacuation study program, I was the lead planner, the statewide program coordinator, the lead designer. I approved all methodology changes. I was the transportation section lead. I was the chair of the oversight committee. I was the section lead group leader. All decisions came through me, and if necessary, through the oversight committee. Changes to the evacuation zones in Florida were done through the evacuation study. They used to be zones 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We found that to be no longer valid, and the study changed them to A, B, C, D, and E, and that's how they're done today, and that trend is growing across the country. We created the first glossary for an evacuation study that defined all of the terms. It is the most asked for portion of our study in other parts of the country and world. I oversaw the creation of TIME, the Transportation Interface for Modeling Evacuation, which I also named. TIME is the methodology, TIME is the software that contains the methodology for modeling traffic evacuation clearance times. 2002 through 2003, I served on the ICCOH, which is a federal committee, the Interagency Coordinating Committee on Hurricanes. It was managed in part by the National Hurricane Program. I was the only non-state or federal participant in the ICCOH consistently from 2003 to 2022. Other people came and went, other people were invited as needed, but I was the only person consistently invited to participate. I served on the technical group that modernized the National Hurricane Program. They were going through a change as some of this technology was changing, and they asked for a focus group to help work with them. Subsequent to that, I also served on a focus group for the National Hurricane Center to provide guidance on what would be needed in modernization. From 1998 to 2022, I worked with the National Hurricane Program, and I worked with them to update the HURAVAC software. in the early 2000s. I can't remember the exact date that we did that. The HUREVAC program is a display program created by the National Hurricane Program that displays the information in a regional evacuation study to make decision-making for evacuations easier for the end user. The studies are this thick, and so to put all the information in a single place, they used HUREVAC. In 2014 through 2015, HUREVAC underwent a major renovation. I served on the technical advisory committee for those changes, and it's now called HEX, same software, completely modernized with modern Windows capacity and more capability. I twice worked with the state and FEMA to redesign the FEMA Hurricane Planning course, teaching local governments how to plan and recover from a hurricane. I worked with the state twice to redesign that course. I taught that course several times. I also taught G358, 363, other classes designed to teach local governments, county governments, and state employees how evacuation works and how to use an evacuation study. I taught those classes for the State Division of Emergency Management under their banner. I've been an adjunct at Duquesne University, University of North Florida, Flagler College, and a guest lecturer for University of North Florida, Florida State University, Flagler, and Jacksonville University. I presented at more than 100 sessions at the Governor's Hurricane Conference in Florida, about 50 sessions at the National Hurricane Conference, and the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association, and dozens of times at the International Hurricane and Disaster Conferences. I've received some 20 awards, professional awards, the last one including the National Hurricane Conference Distinguished Service Award for creating revolutionary methodology and the cornerstone for future evacuation analysis and planning. I've been the principal in the creation and/or update to 26 regional evacuation studies, more than any currently working study manager in the National Hurricane Program. I've worked in several county emergency operations center. In addition to the years I spent in St. Johns County, I went to the counties when requested to support operations during evacuations and after evacuations. I've also spent 3 times I was at the State Emergency Operations Center providing direct input to the governor, the planning section, and the logistics sections. The rest of my qualifications are in my resume. I request to be accepted as an expert in emergency management, the statewide regional evacuation study, including the risk analysis, vulnerability analysis, hazards analysis, behavioral analysis, and hurricane evacuation analysis.
Okay, you may proceed.
I've written you a letter that details much of everything I'm going to say, and then gives more detail. Some of it I didn't want to take more time than necessary. I just wanted to give you the conclusion. So I will go through almost all of it, but I wanted to make sure you knew that everything is in the letter and there's additional information there beyond what I have to say. I'd like to submit that letter. I guess I'm sorry, I've never done this before, so I wrote myself instructions. Okay. So it says here I'm supposed to ask to submit the letter. And I'd like to submit my resume. As a summary statement, based on my analysis, the applicant has underrepresented the risks to residents and property on the outer barrier islands and the vulnerability to disaster and hazards. The applicant understates the impact of public safety, of increasing the vulnerable population and associated increased evacuation clearance times. In my professional opinion, is that the proposed zoning would be contrary to several comprehensive plan and land development code requirements, which are designed to reduce the vulnerability of the population and development to impacts from hurricanes and other disastrous coastal events, and to ensure that the population can be safely evacuated. The primary points in my report that are in there include the location is among the most hazardous to storm surge and hurricanes in the state. It is among the most hazardous in the county. It has been repeatedly devastated by hurricanes, 3 in the last year. The rezoning will increase the population vulnerable to these hazards and the structures vulnerable to these hazards, adversely threatening evacuation failure and exposure to hazardous dangers. Over the years, the evacuation clearance time for Zone A, the most vulnerable zone in the county, have increased. No mitigation at all. The Level E clearance time has increased, with mitigation doing little more than slowing the increase. The barrier islands infrastructure is constrained, further increasing the risk and the realities of the current climate. With demonstrated hurricanes occurring more frequently and more intensely, the risk of rapid intensification, increasing the risk to the population, Zone A, especially the barrier islands, the unpredictability created by increasing occurrences of these rapid intensification events demonstrates the good fortune used in the past that to evacuate the county cannot be relied upon in the future, and I'm going to explain that in further depth. Given the extreme vulnerable location, great distance from safe shelter, and constrained, inadequate evacuation routes, the subject property is an inappropriate place to increase residential or land hotel development. I have a PowerPoint. Can you see? Can you see it? Yeah, you can
I
see.
have it
Okay.
right in front of me.
Okay. This is the subject area. This is the critical link. In all evacuations, the population has to evacuate their zone or the zones evacuated. All hurricane evacuations include Zone A. This is the furthest point you have to evacuate. No. This is the furthest point you have to evacuate from. You have to go all the way through this portion of it, and then once you get to the mainland, you're still on the western edge of the evacuation zone. Clearing the island is only the first part of the evacuation. It takes 22 hours to clear Zone A. Everybody on the island is in Zone A. Once they clear Zone A, if any other evacuation zones were evacuated, they have to get through those zones as well. Now let's keep in mind that if they order a Category 5 evacuation, that means everybody in Zone 5, everybody in Zone 4, everybody in Zone C, everybody in Zone B are evacuating at the same time. Anybody who's tried to get out of a parking lot from the furthest most parking space can tell you they're the last one to leave because everybody else is in front of them. So that 22 hours for the island becomes the 74 hours of a Category F evacuation. Category E evacuation. Sorry, A, B, C, D, E. So it's important to recognize that this is not a simple evacuation. These are amongst the most vulnerable people. There are relevant policies, Policy 5.12, Policy 72.2.2, Goal 101, they're inconsistent with the policies. Increasing the rezoning increases the vulnerable population and increases the hurricane evacuation clearance time for the barrier islands. The evacuation route is constrained. The increased evacuation traffic will place undue burden on the evacuation facilities. The rezoning is inconsistent with these policies. Code Section 34-411F, Code 34-413-2, and Section 34-1040I-1. Rezoning will increase the population on the barrier island and the hurricane evacuation clearance time. The evacuation routes are constrained, and the increased traffic will place undue burden on the evacuation facilities and increase exposure to coastal threats and public safety hazards. Policy 6.114, Goal 73, rezoning will increase development adversely impacting an inadequate evacuation capacity, and I'll talk about that inadequacy later. The evacuation route is constrained. Increased evacuation traffic will place undue burden on the evacuation facility and will not safeguard the public against hurricane events. Objective 73.1. Rezoning will incrementally increase the Category 5 clearance time, which is counter to the objective, and the evacuation clearance time has increased. Policy 101.12, Policy 6.1.17, Objective 23, rezoning will increase the development which may impact environmentally sensitive areas and habitats as a result of the deposit.
Okay, your objection is noted. Please proceed.
Okay. I am an experienced and qualified emergency manager. I have been involved in dozens of hurricanes. Following a hurricane, one of the principal responsibilities of the community is to pull the debris out of areas that are water and everywhere else that it's where it's not supposed to be, but areas that are sensitive land development, land areas, marshlands, waterways, they all have to be cleared. And we have I personally coordinated the pulling of the cement pier from Clay County, which traveled 2 miles upriver and then crossed the river to land in a wetland marsh on the east side of the St. Johns River. Pulling it out of that marshland did damage to the marshland. So that's where I'm basing that statement on, and that was the end of that statement. Now I'd like to spend a few minutes, if I could, discussing some of the differences in my analysis and the information provided by the applicant. Lee County accounts for 72% of the storm surge deaths since 2013. 36 people in Hurricane Ian died in Lee County in the storm surge zone. Rapid intensification. The rapid intensification process of a hurricane is science, and it's not disputed. It is real. It makes it difficult when tropical storms or tropical depressions or disturbances become hurricanes and require evacuations with very little to no notice. A decision should not be made to increase development density or intensity on Captiva Island based on the assumption that hotel guests or others will evacuate early. before the rest of the population, one cannot assume 24 hours notice before an evacuation must occur. With rapid intensification, we may only get 24 hours notice that there is going to be an impact. And assuming the availability of a full 24 hours is actually unreasonable. If you get 24 hours notice, that doesn't mean you have 24 hours to evacuate, and I will explain that further. Public safety depends on the issuance of evacuation orders in sufficient time for the entire population to evacuate. The statewide regional evacuation study designates the base scenario from the statewide regional evacuation study as the scenario to be used when calculating evacuation clearance times for development planning purposes, and it requires 100% of the vulnerable population to be evacuated. Specifically to some of the points in the application or that have been made by the applicant. The applicant's reference to the coastal high hazard area is wrong. They're using a FEMA coastal high hazard area. The FEMA floodplains, which are used for establishing standards for elevation and building code, I recognize that. But they're the wrong model for using for storm surge inundation. They're done on the ADCIRC model. It's a model run by the National Hurricane Program to establish national insurance rates for flood insurance. They set a coastal high hazard area, they set base flood elevations based on probabilities of an area being flooded in a period of time. The Florida statute, section 163-3178, clearly defines the Florida coastal high hazard area, and it defines that it should be the slosh model results. I've included chapter 163 as an attachment to the letter to you. The applicant has incorrectly indicated that new structures built on the island will not likely be damaged by an 18.7-foot storm surge, even though that might be 1.24 feet above the first floor. Again, they're using the ADCIRC model data, not the slosh data. Slosh data provides storm surge inundation above ground, not above sea level. ADCIRC works with sea level. Therefore, a building that's elevated above sea level would not be 1.47 feet, but 4 feet inundated by water, because there's a difference between the ground level and sea level. And that's an example. Depends on if sea level's here, the ground is here, and you're building above sea level, you're building that much higher, not that much higher. That makes sense. I explained it extensively in my letter to you. Past road improvements on the mainland do not address impacts of increased clearance times on Sanibel and Captiva. When the first statewide regional evacuation studies were released in 2010, Chapter 163, 3178, paragraph 8A identified the need to maintain level E evacuation clearance times. The study itself identified the need to maintain and reduce clearance times. Oh, where did I go? There we go. This slide shows the change in clearance times from 2010, not 2017. At 2010, the clearance times have gone up by 8 hours for level A and up by 8 hours for level E. I would also like to note that the 2021 data that shows decreased clearance times, the 2021 model run for time used a different methodology for behavioral analysis that cannot be repeated and will not be repeated. So it was something of an experiment to see if they could find a more accurate tool, and it didn't work. But it still remains to be the accepted evacuation clearance time at this time, and based on that, with the 2010 data, you can see the increase. I've included the tables out of the actual studies as an attachment to the letter to you. The county's effort at impacting the Category 5 clearance times have done little more than reduce the rate of increase, incremental increase in approving development in the evacuation zones without direct mitigation creates a hazard to the people in those evacuation zones. It increases the time it will take them to evacuate. It's really that simple. It's not simple to calculate how much, but it is simple to know that the evacuation clearance time goes up every time you add a vehicle, and goes down when you improve the evacuation clearance, or the evacuation routes themselves, or provide shelters that prevents them from having to travel quite so far. They cannot increase the capacity of the roads on Captiva or Sanibel Island. The only reason we can calculate an increase in the time to evacuate Captiva and Sanibel is because there's only one road out. It leads to a road that has a higher capacity and multiple points of diversion. The model does not allow for sub-zone calculations. It's a zone clearance time. Clearance time for Sanibel and Captiva is 22 hours. The impact will be 30 minutes of increasing the population on Captiva. The population that has to be evacuated, 100% of the potential capacity of the development. The applicant claimed that the Category 5 clearance time for the island, or excuse me, for the county, would increase 3.6 minutes. That's for the Category 5 clearance time for the county. That cannot be calculated by hand. It takes millions of calculations to determine an evacuation clearance time for a level E evacuation. The traffic at every intersection, the movement of traffic across the network, the rate at which people join the evacuation are all part of the dynamic. All the behavioral analysis of where they live, who they are taken into consideration, and the model makes adjustments as the traffic grows.
And there's a program for this, you're saying?
You have to speak a little louder.
And there's a program, a computer program that does this?
Oh, yes, ma'am. It takes it anywhere from a day to 3 days to do a Category 5 evacuation calculation for the study. In order to do the models for the evacuation study, we run banks of computers running different scenarios simultaneously.
So did you run this scenario?
Did
you run this scenario?
I did not, because the time model is currently disabled. The Department of Transportation is investing several $1 million, I don't know the exact number, I know it's over $1 million, in updating the software to a newer support management software. Not that it would mean anything to you, but Time is a software that runs on Cube Avenue, that runs on FSU TMS. So it's a series of models built on top of each other. They're replacing Cube and Cube Avenue with a new software that is more efficient. And it's going to take about a year.
Okay, so I'm trying to determine how you concluded that applicant's statement of how long it would take to evacuate is incorrect.
Because you cannot calculate that by hand. To say that there was, I mean, it's nonsensical to say that
That's why
there's,
you say it's arbitrary because it can't be
it's
calculated by
nonsensical. It
hand.
cannot be calculated, so I don't, any method to be using it would have to be an old-style macro methodology that is obsolete. It was made obsolete in 2010 when time was released.
So then the impact is unknown from your position.
No, I can tell you that it increases because we're adding cars to the network in the Category A zone, which will ripple down. I cannot tell you how much it will increase. Nobody can without rerunning the model.
I see.
And I think this is somewhat of a minor point, but I do want to correct it. The applicant provided information saying that only 5% of tourists are calculated in hurricane evacuation modeling. The base scenario uses 100% of the hotel rooms as occupied during an evacuation. The table submitted in the report is attachment 1 to the hurricane evacuation analysis. The bottom line of it indicates a 1 in the H/M column, or row. That is a ratio number of vehicles per hotel unit. So it means 100% are evacuated. The 5% referred to in the analysis is the number of hotel motel residents that may seek shelter at a public shelter. So it's a determination for sheltering capacity. The applicant's assertion that the island can be evacuated with a clearance time of 5 hours is invalid. The base scenario for the statewide regional evacuation study methodology dictates that you use a 12-hour response curve. That means it can't be less than 12 hours because the last car will not be loaded on the evacuation network until the 12th hour after the evacuation order has been given. This is based on the behavioral analysis, which is part of the general response model that was developed over 40 years worth of data collection from pre and post evacuation analyses.
And you're saying this is an existing condition right now, it's 12 hours.
The 12-hour response curve, the statewide regional evacuation study identifies a 6, a 12, an 18, and a 24-hour response curve. The 12-hour response curve is the most commonly used because you don't want to force the clearance time up over the 12 hours. So if the response time is less than 12 hours, it won't show that. And if it's more than 12 hours, it will show it. A slow evacuation would be, if you wanted to calculate a 24-hour response curve, you might be looking at a storm that's 4 or 5 days out that is weakening, and you're just wondering how long you really need to evacuate the population, as opposed to one that's moving more rapidly and stronger. So the time gives emergency management directors operational capability. They can run quick scenarios to determine how they need to adjust their evacuation orders. But that's used in an operational element. You don't use operational elements when you're doing growth management planning. We use the base scenario. That was designed into the statewide regional evacuation study for that purpose. So the 5-hour clearance time is, again, it's using some old methodology that has nothing to do with the statewide regional evacuation study program methodology, and is, again, nonsensical. The applicant says that the Periwinkle intersection has a different evacuation capacity or vehicles per hour flow rate than I calculated using a normalization of the evacuation data. First and foremost, all of the backup data provided for the applicant's time and capacity numbers are based on daily flow rates and operational numbers for daily traffic. Daily tables and charts are, some of them are used as inputs to the times methodology, but they cannot be used to do evacuation clearance time analysis because they're not relevant to the evacuation data, and that's why time was invented. We had to create a software that would allow us to do clearance time calculations because the existing modeling does not do it. The key item, if you look at the key intersection is this Periwinkle intersection. The important turn is this one right here. The vast majority of the evacuating traffic comes from that direction and makes that turn. In order for them to enter that roadway, cars coming from this direction are going to merge right here. And I'm sure everybody who's ever merged on a highway can tell you that merge, when moving slowly, slows the traffic down. In order to shift to Lindgren, traffic from Periwinkle has to stop, so we still maintain the same hourly flow rate. Cars coming onto the island, cars going left on Periwinkle are not relevant to the evacuation clearance time. They're background traffic. They slow the rate at the intersection, but they don't impact the flow of cars leaving the island. The only thing important is how many cars are leaving the island and how fast can we get them off. Any cars going straight through the intersection from the other side of Periwinkle completely shuts down the evacuation. So 700 vehicles per hour is the rate that I used in my analysis when I did my normalization of the traffic flow rates, and I stand by that being the appropriate number based on the methodology in the statewide regional evacuation study. I've already said that based on my calculation, the clearance time impact is 30 minutes to the island. The applicant's method is 15 minutes based on their use of daily traffic rate flows, and I don't believe they normalized against the statewide regional evacuation study methodology. I want to reiterate that the clearance time for Captiva Sanibel alone is a 30-minute increase. That's 30 minutes to an evacuation zone that has had a 57% increase since 2010. And that's a 30-minute increase to the back of the evacuation in the most vulnerable place in the county. That is a clear impact to public safety. The applicant indicates that you should not use the full capacity of the hotel calculating the evacuation clearance. The base scenario clearly indicates that you use the full capacity of the development in calculating it. And that's also backed up by a letter from the state growth management officials that I received while we were developing the methodology, and I used that letter as guidance during approval of methodology for the evacuation study and for time. Now I want to give this should only take a few more minutes, but I want to take a few minutes to make sure that we all understand clearance time and how it applies and why there's not enough of it. The evacuation begins when an order is issued to evacuate. That's the moment that we start the clock on how long it takes to evacuate. It ends when the last vehicle exits the county or reaches safe shelter. To safely evacuate the population, the clearance time must be less than the time from the time the evacuation order is given until the tropical storm force winds arrive at the coast. It is unsafe to be on a road while tropical storm force winds are blowing. Based on the current evacuation study, Lee County needs 22 hours to evacuate Zone A. That includes the barrier islands. We need all 22 hours to get everybody out. It doesn't end when they leave the county. It just means they've gotten off the island, and the development will increase the time it takes to get off the island. Evacuation clearance time is made up of several components. The first and biggest one is represented by the response curve. The response curve is the time it takes from the time you hear an evacuation order, not the time it's issued, but from when you hear it, to make the decision that you are in fact going to evacuate, prepare yourself, prepare your house, pack, get your family together, get gasoline, get cash, get medications, all of the things that people do to prepare to evacuate. That's represented in the response curve. And it begins with a 12 hours. That means we start at 12 hours, and the evacuation clearance time for this Zone A, we know it's 22 hours, so we know it goes up from that 12 hours. The queuing time is the delay. If it normally takes you an hour to get someplace, and that means you get all the green lights and there are no stops along the way, it's an hour. But if you have to stop for traffic, if you have to stop for lights, if you have to stop for anything along the way, if you have to stop because there's a backup, that's queuing time, and that's added to the travel time, and that's that 1 hour that we just talked about. That if it normally takes you an hour to drive the distance, that is the amount of time, and then you add to that all the queuing time at all the intersections at every point along the evacuation route. So let's look at that as a graphic. So the let's go with the rapid intensification worst case scenario. I recognize it's a worst case scenario, but this is real. It has happened. It will happen again. It will happen more frequently. The National Hurricane Center identifies a threat. From that moment to landfall is predicted to be 24 hours. So we need 22 hours to evacuate Zone A. And that's assuming it's only a Category A evacuation. If it's going to be a major hurricane, which rapid intensification tends to get us to major hurricanes quickly, that means it would be a Category C or higher evacuation, which means we would need a great deal more time to evacuate the population. But let's work with the 22 hours.
We're focusing on the island now or all of A?
I'm talking about A because the island is part of A.
Right, but
they
A is
can't
bigger.
they're not safe until they get out of the Category
Out of
A
A.
evacuation zone. And it's going to take them a half hour longer to get off the island, and they still have to get out of the evacuation zone. So we need 22 hours of that 24 hours. Now let's look at what makes up that evacuation. Once the National Hurricane Center identifies the problem, they have to notify the counties that, hey, you're going to get impacted. Then the county has to declare a state of emergency and develop evacuation orders, and then they have to issue that evacuation order. In a perfect world, that could get done in an hour, 15 minutes per task, and that's pretty quick. I've done a lot of evacuation orders and a lot of evacuation recommendations. It usually takes closer to 2, sometimes more. remembering that the people who have the authority to declare an emergency and order the evacuation are senior elected officials. And you have to get them and educate them. You have to get them down, get them on the phone, get them in the room, and get them to approve the evacuation and the declaration of an emergency. So it can take a little longer. And sometimes you have stubborn politicians. I didn't say
Sometimes
that
you
out loud,
have
did I?
what?
I'm sorry.
What'd you say?
I said sometimes you have stubborn politicians that don't want to believe it could happen. We once spent over an hour trying to convince somebody that we had to evacuate. Now, once we order the evacuation, we have the time for the population to respond. Queuing time, travel time, I explained what those are. Then you have to have a margin of safety. You can't assume that you're going to evacuate up to the very minute the winds are likely to arrive. And this is a number that changes with absolutely every storm. How fast it's moving forward, how far the tropical storm force winds extend out in front of the storm, all of those affect how fast it gets here.
So what is the safety margin now?
The safety margin is you actually have to try and get the evacuation done before the earliest arrival of tropical storm force wind estimates that are come from the National Hurricane Center.
And that varies depending on how big, how fast.
Right. We usually use a couple of hours. You want to be done a couple of hours ahead of time, but you're not usually that precise because it's a strengthening storm. I better have a larger margin of error because if the storm is strengthening, it's getting bigger and the winds are getting stronger, so they're going to get to you sooner. If it all of a sudden picks up forward motion, then they're going to get to you sooner. So you have to have that margin of error because you don't want to evacuate too late so people can't get out. Because if they're on the road, the only place that's more dangerous is in a mobile home on the coast. It's very bad to be on the road in an evacuation when a hurricane hits. Okay, so that means when the arrival of tropical storm force winds, we're out of time. We should have evacuated everybody by then. That's this amount of time, not 24 hours. We only have a portion of that 24 hours. And in my example, it was an example, if we use the 12 plus hours, the 2-hour safety margin, a 3-hour earliest arrival of tropical storm force winds, the original hour from the National Hurricane Center, you only have 18 hours to get everybody out. And we know it's going to take 22. That means you will not be able to complete an evacuation in the time allotted. That's it. This is a scenario that can happen. It has happened in other places in the world. Acapulco was given 24 hours notice that a tropical disturbance was going to hit them as a major hurricane. It did a little over 24 hours later. They were still evacuating tourists 2 days after the impact. It can happen. It will happen. I can't tell you when, but it will. In summary, the rezoning increases the population in the Zone A. Allowing an increase in vulnerable population on barrier islands is knowingly allowing additional population in a vulnerable zone that may not be able to be evacuated safely. Knowingly allowing an increase in population that may not be able to be evacuated is contrary to the responsibility of the local government, its own rules, and Florida statute.
Okay, thank you. Neil?
I do have questions. Do you want to start now?
Why wouldn't we?
Because it's 11:51, so I'm just asking.
When did we come back? Can we go till 12:30? Are you going to need till 12:30?
Maybe. Depends on how long it takes him to answer.
Okay, she can go till 12:30.
Okay.
Why don't we,
Okay. Mr. Alex,
understanding that you'll have an opportunity to address your points of disagreement with his conclusions during your rebuttal.
yes, no, I do, I understand that and I appreciate it. Mr. Alexander, it's my understanding that the first time you ever testified as an expert witness was in Captiva Community Association versus Lee County, is that correct?
Yeah,
So this would be your second time testifying as an expert witness,
yes,
and your testimony was not accepted in the DOA proceeding. Mr. Trescott's was, is that correct?
I don't know.
During that proceeding, did you have an opportunity to hear Rob Price testify?
I'm not sure.
Okay. In those proceedings, you did an analysis. Did you do a similar analysis here?
Yes,
Do you have a copy of that analysis?
no. I already had the capacity of the intersection, so all I had to do was do the calculation for the increased capacity traffic volume.
Well, and that's why I asked if you had the opportunity to hear Mr. Price, because what Mr. Price testified to is that he sits in the Emergency Operations Center in real time and can control all the intersections and lights, and he could make Summerlin, all the lanes go off island. So did you hear any of that testimony?
No, but I'm familiar with the operations of an intelligent traffic management system.
And are you also aware of the fact that, based on an agreement between the county and Sanibel, that the four-way stop is manned and it moves way more traffic than it does in a four-way stop condition?
Yes, but that's irrelevant. The clearance time for Category A is 22 hours. If you allow for the time for the population to exit the county or the evacuation zone, you can reverse engineer the amount of time the evacuation study is taking to clear the intersection by volume. 700 cars per hour would have to pass through that intersection in order for the population to evacuate the county. And I use the highest numbers for evacuating population as possible, because if I use lower numbers, it means that I would get a lower vehicle count. And I wanted higher vehicle counts to make sure that I was giving as realistic a number as I could. So I tied it back to the highest population numbers I could find.
Okay, but that number is significantly less than the amount of traffic the traffic expert for Lee County, Rob Price, testified could pass through that intersection. So you didn't look at that evidence?
Again, those calculations would be irrelevant, because I just needed to normalize the statewide regional evacuation clearance time to the intersection so that I could determine the increase.
You mentioned Section 163.3178 several times. Does that particular statute apply to comp plan amendments and comp plans?
It's where the coastal high hazard area is defined. It also sets the requirement for local government to adopt a Category 5 clearance time and maintain it.
And that doesn't have anything to do with, I don't think, the required base flood elevation in the standard building code or under the FEMA regulations, does it?
I think they are completely different subjects, but the coastal high hazard area definition does tie back to construction standards.
They are completely different, and the engineers that testified, who are experts in that field, testified that they have to rely on the FEMA elevation requirements and the standard building code elevation requirements.
Let's just rebuttal stuff.
you know, you argue back and forth. Ask your questions, save that for your rebuttal.
Thank you. I know you're hungry, I'm trying.
I know you disagree with him, but, you know, save it.
Okay, you challenged Mr. Trescott's testimony and said that he didn't use the 100% occupancy. Were you here when Mr. Trescott testified?
I read the report.
But you didn't hear his testimony.
Yeah, I believe it did.
Mr. Trescott testified that he used 100% occupancy because that's what the state required, but that based on actual data of occupancy rates, it overstated the evacuating population by anywhere from 40 to 60%.
I believe I was contesting his statement that Andrew Sussman told him that you don't use 100% in the evacuation study, and that is incorrect.
Okay. We'll let his testimony stand for what he said. Okay, you indicated in your testimony, I think, that for the base scenario, you do use full occupancy, even if that overstates the impact. Is that correct?
For the base scenario, you use 100% of the occupied dwelling units and 100% of the hotel motel capacity.
And you may not know because you're from North Florida, but do you have any data on the actual occupancy during the summer in Southwest Florida?
Only the stuff I saw from Mr. Trescott.
So you didn't do any independent analysis?
The statewide regional evacuation study requires that you use 100% of the capacity and 100% of the development proposed capacity to do the analysis. So that's what I did.
I understand. You have a table, and it was up on the screen for a while, and it says, and there's a note at the bottom of it about this is experimental methodology. What does that mean?
I believe I mentioned during the latest update of the clearance times, the behavioral analysis inputs for destination travel for evacuees was based on cell phone data from 2 hurricanes that was obtained and used to track where the cell phones went. And we cannot repeat that methodology, and there were serious concerns raised about using it in the first place.
Okay.
And I don't believe they will be using it again.
Okay. You talked about behavior and that you had a commission perhaps that was reluctant to advise people to evacuate. Southwest Florida's, do you have any data that acknowledges the fact that people who've been through, for example, Charlie, behaved differently after that storm than they did perhaps before that storm in terms of leaving well before the official notice?
Yes, the behavioral analysis has a great deal of information about experienced responsive citizens. And there may be a brief period of time after a hurricane that the population will be more responsive or less responsive depending on their experience. If they left and evacuated for a period of time and came home and had 0 impacts to their home, they would be less likely to evacuate. If they evacuated and their homes were devastated, they would be more likely to evacuate. But with the passage of time, the human behavior reverts back to the normal or the standard as the general response model provides.
Well, I don't remember whose testimony it was now, but one of the folks from Sanibel who said that basically everybody's homes out there were impacted. So wouldn't you assume that for those people who remain in residence during storm season, that they would leave as early as possible, based on your behavioral?
I believe that they would be responsive to the evacuation order within the confines of the behavioral analysis, yes, and so that they would evacuate as I described in the example.
And are you aware of the fact that, at least in Lee County, that you get notices on your phone about impending storms?
Yeah,
And,
that's pretty common throughout the state at this point.
okay, and that the NOAA website available to everyone, and we can all watch the cones of influence and the direction of the storm, the speed of the storm, and all those things without somebody telling us to do that?
I'm
In other
aware
words,
you
we have that information available.
I'm aware that information is available, but I'm also aware that people ignore things like tropical disturbances and tropical depressions that don't have any particular path assigned to them.
I'm going to ask you a question. I know it's going to seem unrelated, but it's not. How long does it take you to get from Lee County to, you live in St. John, so let's just say Ponte Vedra?
About 5 hours.
You're good. I evacuate to Jacksonville. It normally takes me 5.5 to 5 3/4 hours to get from here to there. I've evacuated every storm since Charlie, and I can get there under 5 hours because of the way they change how you can travel on the roads and people leave early. So to say that you're gonna get stuck and you can't move isn't necessarily always borne out by reality, which goes back to the fact that most local governments now are working to expedite to get people by road improvements and other things out of their community.
I'm sorry, but nothing you just said is supported by behavioral data that has been collected over the last 40 years. That's assumptions and the results of your particular travel time. Furthermore, clearance time, once you leave the county that's
I
being
understand.
evacuated, is no longer calculated because those counties aren't in the evacuation.
I do understand that, but just to make a blanket statement that you're going to be stuck is not necessarily true, depending on when you leave.
I don't believe I made that blanket statement.
In your letter to the hearing examiner, you mentioned the statewide regional evacuation study program, but again, you did an analysis previously for the DOA proceedings, but you didn't provide an analysis here.
It required one calculation. I didn't see the need to develop a full table. I needed one number divided by another number to get the 30 minutes. So there was no need to do any further work. I'd already normalized the clearance time for the evacuation study to a single point, and the point is the same.
Well, I tried to speed read your letter while you were talking, so, and it's like every paragraph attacks Mr. Trescott, but I don't see the data that supports your conclusions. So can you tell me where in this document the data that supports your conclusions is located?
I made references and attached the relevant documents to each one of my references. And there's footnotes to other pieces of information that can be tracked. And everything else is from the evacuation study itself, and you're welcome to look it up in the evacuation study, or believe me that I know what it says in the study since I wrote it.
So you're talking about the methodology in the study, or are you talking about a national analysis of this property?
The analysis of this property is a matter of, is it increasing the population? That was a simple, now the question is, what does that mean?
Okay. I'm looking at your letter, and I don't see that analysis attached. So where is it attached?
I'm not sure which analysis you're talking about.
The one where you had to make one adjustment, and that's the basis for your conclusion.
The formula is outlined in the paragraph.
Okay. You attacked the letter from, I think it might have still been DCA at the time. I don't know if it was DCA Commerce or, it was DCA. So you attacked the letter from Charlie Gaudier from 2010. I'm trying to understand what the relevance of that letter is.
When developing the methodology for the evacuation study, I used that letter to make determinations regarding who was included in the base scenario and to what extent.
Okay, but you also testified, if I understand correctly, that in the last 15 years, the computer programming and the technology has been significantly improved. Is that a fair statement?
I say that what again?
Okay. You said you used this 2010 letter to evaluate, I think, your study. But I thought you also testified that with the time and some of the other things, that there have been improvements in software and programs in the last 15 years since this 2010 letter.
The 2010 letter was used to create the methodology on what would be included in the base scenario. The computer technology that has changed since 2010 includes foundation software, like updating Windows. It doesn't change the software that we're using, it just runs it faster.
Okay, but don't we have better data now than we did in 2010? If we don't, that's fine. I'm just trying to determine if we do.
The methodology for collecting data for hurricane evacuation is largely unchanged, and any changes were based on changes in population data. We computerized how to get population data from the American Community Survey, so less of it had to be done by hand. If that's what you're talking about, the data itself gets updated on a regular basis. Every time you run a time model, first thing you do is update all the data.
So in your analysis, you submitted that improvements in the evacuation network was irrelevant.
I don't believe I ever said that. I believe I said that improvements to the evacuation network slowed the rate of increase of the clearance time.
Yeah, that might have been what you said, but that is a little more pointed and derogatory in the letter. Yeah, here's what you said. Past road improvements to evacuation routes on the mainland do not address the impacts of increased development of Sanibel Captiva, and then you go on. But in your comp plan analysis, you point to and read from Objective 73.1 on evacuation, and what that objective said is work towards, and that would be the county, working toward attaining out-of-county hurricane evacuation for a Category 5 storm event that does not exceed the timeframes evidenced in the statewide model, and here's how Lee County is supposed to do it. Lee County will work to improve clearance time by increasing shelter availability, which they have done, improving evacuation routes. So regardless of where the evacuation routes are, improving them avoids bottlenecks, and the county's doing that, and increasing public awareness and citizen preparedness, and the county does that. So you've submitted, we're not consistent with that, but it's not applicable to a zoning application. It's applicable to the county, and the county is doing those things. Do you have any evidence that they're not doing what they've said?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, thank you. We are going to break for lunch. We will resume at try to resume at 1:15, 1:30. We'll resume at 1:30. I got the glare from the court reporter.